This massive military project took 10 years to build and collapsed in just over a month. It involved tens of thousands of troops, 150,000 tons of steel, and nearly half the amount of concrete used for the Hoover Dam. On paper, it was the deadliest defensive force France could construct, a 700-kilometer chain of imposing concrete fortresses stretching from the plains near the English Channel to the cliffs of the Alps. Built in the shadow of another looming war, this was France's line in the sand, a physical shield against the dictators rising next door. Yet despite the enormous investment, it failed spectacularly. Today, we are exploring how a project meant to prevent another global war crumbled because the enemy simply knew how to use a map. Welcome to the Maginot Line. To understand why France dedicated itself to this colossal defensive barrier, you first have to consider the devastation of World War I. Over 8 million French soldiers were mobilized, and by the end of the war, more than 6 million had been killed, wounded, or captured. The German invasion had swept through Belgium and Luxembourg and then turned unexpectedly into France, shocking Allied defenses. Most of the fighting on the Western Front unfolded in trenches, hellish pits of mud, disease, and constant shelling. For France, going through another war like that wasn't an option. The country had a shrinking birth rate and an aging population before the war, and afterward a massive part of its male generation was dead. Even though the French eventually pushed back the invasion, the threat of another conflict still weighed heavily on the country. After the war, tensions between European nations remained high, especially with Germany. The Treaty of Versailles formally ended the conflict and returned certain lands to France while forcing Germany to pay for the destruction it had caused. But paper treaties couldn't guarantee safety. The French public needed more than a signature and good faith to believe that another invasion wouldn't happen. Yet France also found itself in a fragile position. The country couldn't appear aggressive without risking another war. It didn't have the manpower to fight Germany on equal footing, and its finances were in ruins. The only realistic solution was to develop a defense that was affordable, fast to organize, and didn't rely on vast human resources. In the 1920s, French military strategists had sketched out plans for a defensive structure that would follow the country's natural borders, a chain of fortified zones to slow or stop invasions. But when the Minister of War, André Maginot, stepped in, the project evolved from scattered notes into one of the most ambitious fortification systems in history. Building on earlier proposals, Maginot imagined a broken but connected line of forts, tunnels, gun towers, and underground networks stretching from the Belgian border down alongside Germany. Small groups of well-positioned troops could hold off much larger forces with the help of strategic strongholds. Even when concerns were raised about the cost of building across the entire frontier, Maginot insisted the price of concrete was lower than the cost of another lost generation of soldiers. 6 years after endorsing the idea, Maginot secured all necessary funding in August 1928. Although he died before construction ended, the line would soon bear his name. The builders completed as much as they could afford, about 7 to 20 kilometers. It ran from the flats by the English Channel, across forests on the Belgian border, and through the Vosges Mountains. France identified 5 high-priority fronts: the Italian border, the land between the Mediterranean and Switzerland, the Swiss frontier, sections along the Rhine, and Belgium's southern border up toward the Channel. But with limited money and an enormous area to cover, they couldn't fully secure every point. One major gap stood out: the Ardennes forest on the Belgian border. The rugged terrain was considered so difficult and steep that the French believed it would naturally slow any army long enough for them to mobilize. Commanders estimated they would have 8 to 10 days to react if an invasion came through that area. Their defensive planning also counted on friendly relations with Belgium, a decision that would eventually cost them dearly. Construction across such varied terrain presented countless challenges. The Italian Alps were among the most difficult areas, and French leaders were under pressure to accelerate the timeline. The mountains provided good camouflage for the concrete fortresses, but workers had to carve through limestone and granite using crowbars, pneumatic drills, and jackhammers. After several accidents involving liquid explosives, they switched to smaller cartridges and dynamite. Motorized cable cars transported rubble, equipment, and soldiers down steep slopes along pre-assembled rails that were easy to install and remove. In Alsace alone, crews removed more than 1 million cubic meters of stone piece by piece. Because so much of the line passed through rural regions, engineers laid extensive railway networks using mechanical shovels to transport supplies. Higher elevations added another problem. Freezing temperatures meant builders only had about 3 workable months each year. Some structures were abandoned unfinished because of the harsh climate. Records also show that many of the laborers were not highly skilled in manual construction, which caused even more delays. Still, what they built underneath the surface was extraordinary. By 1935, over 100 kilometers of underground roads and railway systems had been completed. Eventually, the subterranean network stretched over 450 kilometers, allowing troops, guns, and equipment to move quickly between distant forts. Some fortresses were buried as deep as 80 meters below the surface. Engineers described the concept as defense in depth. These giant bases spread out underground like inverted trees. Large complexes housed around 1,000 soldiers, with bunkers branching upward to artillery stations. Steel turrets and domes, some weighing more than 250 tons, were installed using heavy-duty cranes. These structures emerged like metal mushrooms from thick concrete walls up to 2 meters thick. Building into the mountains provided natural camouflage and rock protection, while also saving costs. Not every region allowed such deep excavation. In areas where sandstone slowed digging to about 2 meters per day, or where clay threatened flooding, the process changed. In the flatlands near Luxembourg, where the soil was especially poor, designers used the cut-and-cover method. They dug trenches, laid tunnels, and reburied them. But if the concrete wasn't mixed or poured correctly, it could crack, leak, or fail under bombing. Every part of the line, no matter the terrain, posed its own difficulties. What kept everything going was a material that would soon shape the future of modern construction: reinforced concrete. Though invented in the mid-19th century, reinforced concrete had never been used on this kind of scale. The Maginot Line became its proving ground. Reinforced concrete was made by pouring the cement mixture over steel rods, forming a strong, durable composite that could stretch across long spans. Workers set up horizontal mixers on site and compacted layers by hand using iron tampers weighing around 15 kilograms. Others used compressed air tools and table vibrators to speed up the work. Entire tree trunks were used to form framework for the walls. Steel bars were bent manually using a lever system and hammered into shape to anchor into the concrete as it cured. Construction crews worked day and night, 7 days a week, to ensure strength and waterproofing. Laborers rotated in tight shifts, lived near the sites, and endured exhausting conditions. Factories in places like Alsace could produce concrete at a rate of 62 cubic meters an hour. When the work finally ended, more than 1.5 million cubic meters of concrete and over 150,000 tons of steel had been used. France built more than 5,000 structures along the Maginot Line. Pillboxes were placed from Longuyon to the Rhine at kilometer intervals like stepping stones leading to the larger underground fortresses, about 50 massive systems in total. The gaps between these structures were reinforced with minefields and iron beams embedded into the ground to stop tanks. Around 100 laborers at a time worked 8-hour shifts installing anti-tank stakes, weighing about 25 kilograms each, along with huge stretches of barbed wire across fields and farms. In 1931 alone, over 20,000 workers were actively engaged on this mega project. That number swelled in later years as Germany rapidly built up its military. By the late 1930s, troops were even pulled in to speed up final construction. When all was said and done, the cost of the Maginot Line was over 5 billion francs, equal to nearly $4 billion today, and this was considered the cheaper solution to war. After nearly a decade of sacrifice, budget strain, and engineering challenges, construction ended in 1938. But despite the scale, effort, and cost, the line would fail, not because its concrete cracked, but because of strategic assumptions. The Ardennes, left weakly defended due to confidence in the forest's natural protection, was the gap that would decide everything. On May 10, 1940, 136 German divisions burst through the Ardennes, bypassing the strongest parts of the line and smashing smaller defenses with ease. As thousands of German aircraft blacked out the skies, the French Air Force was crippled before many of its pilots even reached their planes. One by one, fortifications were isolated and overwhelmed. On July 1, 1940, just over a month after the invasion began, the last French defenders along the Maginot Line surrendered. France had fallen. Today, parts of the line still stand, repurposed for unexpected uses. Some sections function as wine cellars. The Schonenburg Fort, the last to hold out, is now a museum. Visitors can also see the forts in Alsace and others in Longuyon, Fermont, and Fâches-Tumenil. Many towns along the line still host remains of bunkers or underground tunnels. Though remembered as a massive strategic error, the Maginot Line remains a symbol of French determination. Even if the German army had attacked it directly instead of circumventing it, their blitzkrieg tactics might still have broken through parts of it. But the lesson remains clear. Even the strongest walls fall when the strategy behind them is flawed. So the real question is, how could the German advance in World War II have been stopped? What could France or the Allies have done differently to prevent such a rapid defeat? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.